Hi, team. So we had three readings this week that Justin and I are going to discuss, and we'll have an open discussion, and then we'll toss it back to Yellow Dig for continuing questions.
Okay, so our third reading, Eye in the Sky.
So this one was particularly fascinating. This was a podcast that was done that discussed really, they had a gentleman that was involved in the military, and he developed a tool using students at a military academy to generate a UAV, an unmanned aerial vehicle that would take photographs of the land over Fallujah. And so they were experiencing these incidents with these roadside bombings, and they wanted to determine who had perpetrated these bombings, who had set these bombs that were harming our troops. And so they developed this software where it would surveil the area and it would take pictures on regular increments. And so when an incident occurred, they could go back to those pictures and then they could find when a vehicle arrived on the scene, planted that bomb, and then they would track it forward to see where it went so that they could then go track down the perpetrators and hold them accountable. So he's adapted this technology and brought it to the US. And so he's looking at marketing it towards the public safety in the US. And so the podcast walked through an opportunity that they had actually in another country to really to find somebody, one that had perpetrated a theft at someone's house, a burglary while they weren't home. And so they tracked it back after they saw the aerial footage. And then they also actually tracked down someone who had murdered a police officer. And so they promoted this amongst numbers of cities and towns in Ohio in the US. But when they took it to the city council, they had mixed reviews from the stakeholders. So generally, a third were in support of it, a third were indifferent, and a third were very adamantly opposed. And so we could talk through what that looked like and what your thoughts and impressions are on the Eye in the Sky podcast. It was fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. And I think anybody that's been to a town hall meeting or a city council meeting, that kind of stuff, there's always going to be that audience out there that truly doesn't understand what's going on. And I think just in general, as human beings, I think we fear what we don't understand. And so even with the presentation, with this, with Ross McNutt, the military guy, he went to the ACLU, he contacted all of these privacy organizations. He wanted to make it very clear that the cameras were basically showing people as pixels. I mean, you couldn't see what they were wearing, you couldn't see what nationality they were, what racial background. You couldn't tell any of that. I mean, these pictures were being taken from 10,000 feet in the air. But when it came down to it, there was a lot of people that were concerned about what the information was going to be used for, because all of a sudden they've lost control of their personal data. Whether or not that they're going to be tracked going to school, whether or not the data could be used by could go through a public Freedom of Information Act to acquire that information and maybe track down an ex-girlfriend or ex-boyfriend, or see if what your spouse is doing on the weekends, that kind of stuff. And so there was a lot of, I guess, fear associated with what the information could be used for.
I found that interesting too. It is difficult to understand how the information would be used and even what it looks like if you're not actually participating in one of these investigations, say. And like you said, he intended for it to be at the pixel level, but as a member of the public, you always have to wonder, is there an opportunity to zoom in? Is there an opportunity to drill in and see more than they claim they can see? Can they bury that in the fine print of the disclosure somewhere? Even though they say they won't do it, could they still if they chose to? And so something to be aware of with respect to the ethics and privacy of something like that. And so it seems like a great instrument to be able to track down those who would murder a police officer, but at the same time, what other civil liberties might be violated. It's scary. It's a concern.
Yeah, definitely. And some of those concerns are founded.